Winter made Northglass Harbor look peaceful, even as an entire neighborhood disappeared beneath snow and steel. Only one blue-gray house remained, owned by a retired Navy technician who refused to sign it away. Then, his aging German Shepherd found fresh footprints leading toward a drainage line no modern map admitted still existed. Beneath the house waited an old inspection well, sealed only days before anyone could test what was inside. The evidence could explain years of contaminated water, but saving it meant facing the company that controlled nearly everything around them. This became more than one man defending his home. It became a test of whether silence was still acceptable when an entire community needed the truth. Tell us where you are watching from, share what stays with you, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. Winter made Northglass look cleaner than it was. Fresh snow lay over the freight yards and warehouse roofs, smoothing the hard angles of steel and concrete into pale, quiet shapes. Sunlight broke across Lake Superior in long, white bands, too bright to look at directly. Beyond the frozen edge of the harbor, red cargo cranes stood motionless against the sky, their arms raised as if waiting for instructions that had not yet come. From a distance, Shoreline Ward might have seemed peaceful. Up close, it looked erased. The neighborhood had once held two short streets of mechanics, retired sailors, widowed shopkeepers, and families whose lives followed the rhythm of ships arriving and leaving. There had been porch lights, snow shovels leaning beside doors, radios playing through open garage windows in summer. Now, most of the houses were gone. Meridian Crown Port Holdings had bought them one by one. Where homes had stood, there were rectangular hollows beneath the snow, temporary steel fencing, and orange survey stakes driven into frozen earth. New signs showed clean architectural renderings of enclosed freight warehouses, loading corridors, and a landscaped buffer that did not yet exist. At the end of the old street stood the only house Meridian Crown did not own. It was a narrow, two-story structure with weathered blue-gray siding, a steep roof, and a chimney that leaned just enough to look stubborn. Snow gathered along its porch rail. Warm yellow light showed through the kitchen window. Harlan Whitaker stood inside that window, looking out at the empty lots. At 59, Harlan still carried the width of a man who had spent much of his working life lifting equipment in places where machinery had been designed before comfort. He stood a little over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, with a long, angular face and a nose that bent slightly left from an old shipboard accident. His hair was ash-brown, silvered heavily at one temple, cut short at the sides but no longer kept to Navy standards. A clipped mustache and uneven gray stubble softened nothing about him. That morning he wore an olive-drab combat shirt, fitted through the chest, with dark camouflage sleeves and faded horizontal bands around the upper arms. He wore it not because he wanted to look like a soldier, but because the fabric moved well, dried quickly, and had survived more repairs than most modern clothes deserved. He lifted his coffee and watched a Meridian Crown pickup pass slowly along the road. Calder noticed it before he did. The German Shepherd lay near the radiator, with his front paws crossed, the black saddle of his coat broken by a distinct band of golden fur running diagonally across his side. His muzzle had gone gray earlier than the rest of him. One ear stood straight, the other angled slightly outward, giving him a permanent look of measured doubt. The truck slowed in front of the house. Calder raised his head, but did not bark. Harlan waited. The truck moved on. "Good decision," he said. Calder lowered his head again, though his amber eyes stayed on the window. The house had cost Harlan nearly everything he had when he left the Navy. Not the purchase itself. Northglass had been cheap then. The money went into the things no buyer noticed in photographs. Reinforced stair treads, wider handrails, new heating lines, level flooring, insulated pipes, and a shower fitted for the days when his right knee refused to bend without negotiation. He had not inherited the place. No parent had died in it. No wife waited in its rooms as a memory polished by grief. He had chosen it. That distinction mattered. For 28 years, most of his important decisions had belonged to schedules, commanders, damaged systems, and men higher in rank. Even after leaving, he found himself pausing before simple choices as though waiting for permission. Northglass had been the first place where no one told him where to sleep, which wall to repair first, or when to leave. The house was paid for. Meridian Crown's latest offer looked generous until a person read the pages beneath the number. 10 days to vacate, no relocation assistance, no responsibility for future environmental claims, no guarantee that comparable housing would remain available anywhere near the lake. They called it opportunity. Harlan called it a contract written for a man too tired to reach the last page. At 11 that morning, 2 representatives arrived in a black sedan. Calder watched from the hallway as Harlan opened the door but left the storm chain fastened. The younger man carried a leather folder. The older woman introduced herself as regional counsel and spoke with the polished patience of someone accustomed to objections becoming signatures. She talked about expansion, job creation, winter freight capacity, and Northglass's need to compete with ports farther south. Harlan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Send it in writing." "We already have." "Then you have my answer in writing, too." The younger man shifted his weight. "Mr. Whitaker, this project has support from the city. Then the city should be pleased with all the property it already sold you." The woman's expression tightened, but only for a second. "We're trying to avoid inconvenience." Harlan glanced past her at the empty lots. "You've removed 31 houses. Through voluntary purchase. Then mine should be easy to understand." She studied him, perhaps deciding whether his calm was negotiable. Behind Harlan, Calder rose. He did not growl. He simply moved into the hallway, planted his front feet, and looked through the narrow opening. The woman noticed the old harness hanging from a peg near the door. "Working dog?" "Retired." "Like you?" Harlan met her eyes. "Send it in writing." After they left, he locked the door once. Then he stood with his hand on the bolt. Calder stepped close and placed his right front paw on the toe of Harlan's left boot. It was not trained behavior, at least not one Harlan had ever taught him. The dog had begun doing it months earlier whenever Harlan paused too long at a door or window, as though placing a small claim on the present moment. Harlan looked down. "You have opinions now?" Calder kept his paw where it was. Harlan removed his hand from the lock. "Fine." That night, the first fence latch disappeared. Not broken, removed. Harlan found the 2 screw holes clean and empty, the gate hanging slightly out of line. There were no footprints because the wind had dragged snow over the yard during the night. He replaced the latch and wrote down the time. 2 nights later, the outside water valve was half open. The water had run long enough to freeze a pale blue sheet across the foundation stones. Harlan shut it off, inspected the threads, and found tool marks on the brass. He photographed them. The following evening, he discovered a crack in the supply pipe near the sidewall. It was narrow and deliberate, made where a person could blame pressure or frost if no one looked too closely. Harlan looked closely. Damage control had taught him that accidents possessed a kind of honesty. Metal failed along stress lines. Ice expanded where water had trapped itself. Heat left signatures. Pressure took the easiest route. This crack had been helped. He repaired the pipe temporarily, installed 2 battery cameras, and began keeping a notebook beside the kitchen telephone. Dates, temperatures, times. Wind direction. Any truck that slowed near the house. He told himself the pattern was simple intimidation. Calder disagreed. Each night the dog spent less time facing the road and more time near the rear windows. He would stand beside the back door, ears angled toward the slope behind the house, where old drainage channels descended toward the port. There was nothing there now but weeds, buried concrete, and snow. Still, Calder listened. On the 4th morning, a warning sign appeared beside Harlan's front gate. Unstable ground authorized personnel only. The sign carried no city seal, no inspection number, and no contact information. Harlan pulled it out of the snow and examined the stake.
The lower 10 inches were wet with dark mud that had not come from his frozen front yard. He carried it into the shed. Calder followed, sniffed the mud, and turned toward the back of the property. Harlan noticed. He did not follow. Not yet.
That evening he ate stew at the kitchen table while snow began falling again. Calder lay nearby, his body facing the stove, but his ears turned toward the back wall. The old house made familiar sounds around them. Heating pipes clicked, timber settled, wind pressed a dry branch against the siding. Then Calder lifted his head. He did not bark. His whole body became still. Harlan set down his spoon. Calder rose, crossed the kitchen, and touched his nose to the back door. "What is it?" The dog looked at him. Harlan pulled on his navy waxed jacket, wool cap, and gloves. He clipped the woven lead to Calder's leather collar, though the dog rarely needed restraint on the property. Outside, the snowfall was soft and steady, bright beneath the security light. Calder moved along the fence line, nose low. Near the rear corner, the new latch Harlan had installed hung open. One screw lay in the snow. Fresh boot prints crossed the yard. Harlan crouched. The tread was broad, industrial, with a broken chevron near the heel. The prints did not come from the road. They led uphill from the fence, circled the outdoor pipe, then returned toward the slope behind the house. Calder followed them. At the edge of the property, he stopped. Below them, snow-covered brush concealed an old drainage cut running toward the port. The boot prints continued into it. Harlan swept his flashlight across the ground. The prints stayed visible for another 20 feet, then ended beside a mound of ice and dead grass. Calder moved closer and began pawing gently at the snow. A curved edge of metal appeared. Harlan cleared more snow with his boot. Beneath it lay a round utility cover, old enough that rust had filled most of the stamped lettering. Calder put one paw on the metal. The cover shifted with a hollow vibration. The dog recoiled so sharply the lead snapped tight. For an instant, Calder was no longer an 8-year-old retired working dog on a quiet Michigan night. His ears flattened, his weight dropped backward, the muscles along his shoulders locked. Harlan knew the reaction. Years earlier, a corroded platform had collapsed beneath Calder and his former handler inside an industrial facility. The man survived, but Calder never again trusted hollow metal beneath his paws. Harlan shortened the lead but did not pull. He knelt in the snow beside him. Calder's breathing came fast. His eyes remained fixed on the cover. "It's all right," Harlan said quietly. The words were not true yet, but they were not in order either. He placed one gloved hand against Calder's left shoulder, avoiding the old joint. "We don't have to go closer." Snow collected on the dog's back. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Calder shifted forward on his own. One step, then another. He did not touch the cover again. He stopped beside it, trembling faintly but still present. Harlan looked at the rusted rim. Beneath the ice, he found the remains of a stamped emblem, a circle crossed by 3 wavy lines. He had seen it before, on old municipal water diagrams, a city utility mark, decades out of use. From a narrow gap at the edge of the cover came a thread of warmer air. It touched Harlan's face with a faint odor, metallic at first, then strangely sweet, artificial, and wrong. Calder backed away. This time, he placed himself between Harlan and the cover. A low warning sounded in his chest. Harlan's first instinct was to lift the plate and see what was underneath. He did not. Instead, he photographed the prints, the cover, the utility mark, and the disturbed snow. He marked the location on his phone and tied a strip of orange tape to a nearby branch. Then he led Calder home. Inside, Harlan removed his gloves and wrote down everything while it was fresh. At dawn, he filled Calder's water bowl from the kitchen tap. The dog approached, lowered his muzzle, and stopped. He sniffed once. Then he stepped away. Harlan carried the bowl to the window. In the pale morning light, a film moved across the surface, so thin it could have been residue, dust, or nothing at all. He did not taste it. He sat off the house's main water valve, opened a case of bottled water from the pantry, and filled a clean bowl. Calder drank. Outside, the cranes of Northglass Harbor began moving against the bright winter sky. Harlan stood beside the sink, one hand resting on the cold metal valve. Until that morning, he had believed Meridian Crown wanted his land. For the first time, he considered that they might want whatever the land allowed them to reach. By 8 the next morning, Harlan had placed 3 bottles of tap water in a small insulated cooler and driven them across Northglass. He had filled each bottle from a different point in the house: the kitchen sink, the basement utility tap, and the outdoor line nearest the damaged pipe. He labeled them with time, location, and temperature in block letters using the brass mechanical pencil he normally reserved for repair diagrams. The woman at the local testing office accepted the cooler without reacting to the story behind it. She wore a white coat over a green sweater and explained that a basic screening could be completed quickly, but a certified analysis for industrial compounds would take several days and might need to be sent to a larger laboratory in Duluth. Harlan paid in advance. He did not mention that Calder had refused the water. A dog stepping away from a bowl was a reason to become cautious, not a conclusion anyone could defend. Outside the office, Northglass shone beneath a clear winter sky. Snowbanks reflected so much light that every building seemed cut from white metal. Freight trucks moved toward the harbor in a steady line, their tires grinding salt into the road. Harlan sat in his truck for a moment with the heater running. He had spent most of his working life separating what he suspected from what he could prove. On a ship, panic could spread faster than smoke. A man who called every hot pipe a fire lost credibility before the real emergency arrived. But a man who waited too long could lose more than credibility. Calder sat in the rear seat behind him, his harness resting on the floor. The dog looked toward the road, then back at Harlan. "I know," Harlan said. Calder had not made a sound. That was often how their conversations worked. The pump repair shop stood north of town near an old rail spur, in a low brick building whose faded sign read Rusk Pump and Motor in hand-painted blue letters. Snow had been cleared from the entrance with practical aggression, leaving 2 walls of packed ice along the drive. Inside, the shop smelled of machine oil, hot dust, rubber belts, and coffee that had been allowed to become a separate industrial product. Delphine Rusk stood behind a workbench with a motor housing clamped open in front of her. Del was 62, compact and strong through the forearms, with silver-streaked hair cut to her jaw and pinned away from one side of her face by a crescent-shaped steel clip. She wore a faded navy work bib over a brick-red flannel shirt. A folding wooden ruler protruded from one pocket. She looked up when Harlan entered. Then she looked past him at Calder. "Dog can come in," she said. "You can remain under review." Harlan closed the door behind them. "Good morning to you, too. It was until you brought that expression into my shop." "What expression?" "The one you wore at every Shoreline meeting before deciding you had someplace better to be." Calder moved past Harlan and sniffed the lower edge of a cabinet. Del watched him with more welcome than she had offered the man. Harlan set his phone on the bench and opened the photographs. "I found an old utility cover behind the house." Del did not reach for the phone. "So call the city." "It had this mark." He enlarged the image. The change in her face was slight but immediate. Her eyes sharpened. She wiped both hands on a rag and took the phone. The image showed the rusted circle crossed by 3 wavy lines. Del stared at it for several seconds. "Where exactly?" "Back slope, near the old drainage cut." "And you opened it?" "No." That earned him the first hint of approval. "Calder reacted to the air coming through the rim," he continued. "Metallic, sweet. I shut off the water this morning and sent samples for testing." Del handed the phone back. "Smartest thing you've done in 10 years. That a compliment?" "No." Harlan showed her the images of the loosened valve, the cut pipe, the false warning sign, and the fresh boot prints. Del studied each one without commentary. When he reached the photograph of the dark mud on the signpost, she leaned closer. That didn't come from your front yard. I know. You know now. The sentence landed without force, which made it harder to resist. Years earlier, Dell had helped organize meetings about water pressure failures in Shoreline Ward. Residents had described strange odors, mineral buildup, and pets avoiding certain taps. Harlan had attended one meeting, listened for 40 minutes, and left without signing the request for an independent inspection. The reports had been inconsistent. Different houses, different months, no single pattern he could verify. At least that was what he had told himself. Dell had called it hiding behind standards no one else had the money to meet. Standing in her shop now, Harlan could still see the old meeting room. Folding chairs, wet coats, paper cups, people talking over one another because fear had made them impatient. He had disliked the disorder of it. He had mistaken that dislike for judgment. I should have stayed, he said. Dell's eyes lifted from the phone. There was no apology shaped beautifully enough to repair a decade. Harlan knew that. He did not add explanations. Dell looked at him for a long moment, then took the wooden ruler from her pocket. Come on. She led him through a steel door into the storage building behind the shop. The room was colder than the front, crowded with old pump casings, cracked gauges, coils of copper line, and shelves sagging beneath binders. Dell moved through it without hesitation, tapping the ruler against boxes as though waking memories. Your house wasn't the pumping station, she said. People always get that wrong. I never called it one.
You let the real estate agent call it that. I didn't buy the history, I bought the roof. That's the problem with history. It doesn't care what part you paid for. She pulled a canvas cover from a flat wooden cabinet and opened one of the wide drawers. Inside lay rolled maps, yellowed at the edges. The main pressure station sat closer to the lake, Dell said, torn down in '78. The house was built for the operator, easier to keep someone nearby when the valves froze or pressure dropped at 2 a.m. She selected a roll tied with blue string. When the station came out, most of the working equipment went with it. But not every access point, too expensive to fill some of them correctly, so the city capped them, wrote a note, and moved on. That utility cover behind my house? Could be an overflow access, could be inspection, depends which revision survived. Dell spread the map over a scarred work table. Calder approached but stopped before placing his paws near the paper. Harlan gave him a quiet hand signal, and the dog settled beside the table. Dell weighted the corners with metal fittings. The drawing showed Shoreline Ward before the warehouses, before the new freight corridor, before most of the streets had been renamed. Fine blue and black lines passed beneath house lots and service roads. Some ended at symbols Harlan recognized. Others disappeared under later pencil corrections. Dell traced one line with the ruler. Here's your property. Operator's house here. Pressure chamber here. The line passed beneath Harlan's basement and continued south. It crossed what was now Meridian Crown property. Dell moved the ruler again. This section used to run beneath the maintenance yard. Then the solvent storage was built over it. Was it active? Depends what you mean by active. Carrying normal flow? Probably not. Open enough to move groundwater, overflow, or whatever someone sent through the wrong valve? That's a different question. Harlan leaned over the map. The line reappeared beyond the storage yard and joined a branch marked as municipal drainage. Then it went back toward the neighborhood. Before the later upgrades, yes. Why isn't it on the current utility map? Dell gave him a tired look. Because current maps are written by people who believe old things stop existing when they stop billing for them. She went to a shelf and returned with a red binder. Inside were maintenance sheets written in several hands. Dell found an entry from 24 years earlier describing a secondary basement inspection access at the operator's residence. Harlan read it twice. Basement. Move anything heavy lately? There's a steel cabinet against the north wall. Dell folded her arms. And you never wondered why the concrete beneath it sounded hollow? I don't strike every floor I own with a hammer.
You used to inspect damaged ships. I was trying not to inspect my house like one. The answer came sharper than he intended. Dell did not retreat from it. For a moment, the storage room became very quiet. Then Calder rose and moved between them, not touching either person. He stood with his head low, golden black coat bright beneath the cold overhead light. Dell looked at the dog. "You still do that?" she asked Harlan. "Do what? Turn every question into an accusation before anyone else gets the chance?" Harlan's first response formed quickly. He let it go. Dell returned her attention to the binder. "I'll come look at the basement," she said. "Not because we're even. I didn't ask you to be. No, that's another thing you're good at." The drive back to Shoreline Ward took less than 15 minutes. During that time, Harlan received an email from Meridian Crown's legal office. The subject line read, "Structural Safety Notification." Attached was a report from a private engineering firm stating that a suspected pipe failure near the foundation might have compromised the soil. The city had scheduled an emergency inspection in 3 days. Dell read the report from Harlan's phone while standing in his kitchen. "They inspected the soil?" "No." "They entered the property?" "No." "Then this is an assessment based on outside observations and whatever Meridian gave them." It says potential immediate concern. That phrase is doing a lot of paid labor. Calder moved toward the basement door. The house below was unfinished except for the utility area and a narrow workshop. Harlan switched on the lights and descended first. Calder followed until his paws reached the top metal-edged stair tread. He stopped. Harlan did not call him. Dell watched from below as Harlan waited on the third step, body angled away from the dog. After several breaths, Calder came down slowly, placing each paw with care. No praise, no command. Only room. The steel storage cabinet stood against the north wall. Harlan and Dell emptied the tools from it, then dragged it forward across the concrete. Behind it, the floor looked ordinary. Dell tapped the ruler against the surface. Solid. She moved 6 inches and struck again. The sound changed. Hollow. Together they scraped away an old layer of gray floor paint. A rusted iron ring emerged, set flat into a circular steel plate. Dell crouched and ran one finger along the edge. Inspection cover. Harlan saw the welding before she pointed it out. A bead of metal sealed the entire rim. The weld was smooth, bright beneath the dust, and far newer than the plate. Dell touched it once, then looked up. This wasn't done when the system was abandoned. How new? Could be months, could be weeks, but not decades. Calder approached the plate, sniffed the air above it, and withdrew without stepping onto the metal. Harlan's gaze moved to the small basement window. One of his cameras covered the side yard. Another watched the back gate. Neither showed the basement. He went upstairs and opened the recorded files from the previous night. At 2:16 a.m., the outside lights flickered. The camera image froze. At 2:23, the feed returned. 7 minutes missing. The system log blamed a power interruption, but the other houses on the street were gone. There was no neighbor whose lights he could compare. Dell stood behind him, arms crossed. Someone knew where the access was. And knew the cameras would reset. Or tested them first. By mid-afternoon, a dark SUV pulled up outside the house. The man who stepped out wore a navy parka over a gray sweater and dark trousers. He was tall, lean, and so carefully put together that the salt on the road seemed unwilling to touch him. Corbin Vale Strake introduced himself as Meridian Crown's Regional Development Director. His hair was steel gray and precisely combed. A matte titanium ring rested on his right hand, and he turned it once with his thumb while looking at the empty lots surrounding Harlan's home. "I thought it might be better to speak without attorneys," Strake said. "Attorneys already spoke." "Attorneys explain positions. I'd like to explain consequences." Harlan remained on the porch. Calder stood inside the storm door, visible but quiet. Strake spoke about freight capacity, winter shipping delays, and tax revenue. He knew the number of jobs attached to each construction phase. He knew how many businesses had left Northglass in the last decade. He did not sound dishonest. That made him more difficult to dismiss. A nearly empty neighborhood cannot determine the economic future of an entire port, Strake said. A nearly empty neighborhood became empty because your company bought it. Voluntarily. Under increasing pressure. Pressure is not coercion. Harlan looked toward the steel fencing where houses had once stood.
That depends who controls the clock. Strake offered a new contract. The amount was substantially higher. The deadline was 10 days. Harlan read the first page, then the environmental waiver. Why is this here? Standard language. Then remove it. I don't draft the agreements. You direct development. Strake's thumb turned the ring again. The property has documented structural concerns. We're trying to give you an exit before those concerns reduce its value. Harlan folded the contract. If your company trusts inspections and legal process, why are people cutting my fence at night? Strake's face remained composed. No employee or authorized contractor of Meridian Crown has been instructed to enter your property unlawfully. That wasn't what I asked. It is the answer I can give. Harlan handed the papers back. Strake did not take them. Keep them, he said. Read everything. I do. For the first time, Strake looked directly at the house rather than at Harlan. His gaze rested briefly on the basement window. Then he walked back to the SUV. That small movement stayed with Harlan long after the vehicle left. After dark, Dell returned with a flashlight, a portable work lamp, and a small inspection mirror. She studied the welded plate again, but refused to let Harlan cut it open. "We don't know what's underneath," she said. "Gas, pressure, contamination, bad air? Pick whichever mistake you prefer." Harlan knew she was right. He disliked that this no longer felt like his own problem to solve. Dell searched through the photocopies she had made from the old binder. Near the bottom of one faded maintenance sheet, she found a handwritten note. She read it once without speaking. "What?" Harlan asked. Dell turned the paper toward him. The note described the basement access as a secondary sampling point to be used after a chemical incident in the waterfront storage zone. Harlan looked from the paper to the newly welded cover. The access had not merely survived by accident, it had been designed to preserve information when something upstream went wrong. His phone was already in his hand when Dell spoke. "Call someone who knows water chemistry, not city maintenance, not the port." Harlan searched the state professional directory and found a name Dell recognized from an independent watershed case several counties south. Dr. Leona V. Maris answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was low, precise, and impatient with unnecessary detail. Harlan explained the old access, the odor, the suspected contamination, and the new weld. She interrupted only once. "Did you open it?" "No." "Did your dog make direct contact with the vapor?" "Briefly outside, not with the basement plate." "Keep him away from both locations. Shut the basement door. Do not cut the well. Do not enter any drainage structure. Ventilate only if you can do it without pulling air into the living space." "When can you come?" There was a pause filled by the sound of typing. "Tomorrow morning, weather permitting." After the call, Dell returned to the map. Calder lay near the basement door, alert but no longer trying to approach it. Dell traced the old pipe beneath Harlan's house, across the former maintenance yard, and toward the solvent storage zone. Then she found a notation written in red pencil at the margin. "Emergency sample access, residential operator house." No equivalent notation appeared on the modern map Harlan had downloaded from the city. The old access point had not simply been forgotten. Somewhere between paper and digital record, it had been erased. And someone had recently come back to seal it. Dr. Leona V. Maris arrived in Northglass shortly after sunrise, when the snow was bright enough to make the harbor look sharpened at the edges. Her vehicle was a dark green utility wagon with road salt crusted along the doors and two locked equipment cases strapped in the rear. She stepped out,
wearing a mustard-colored waterproof jacket over a dark teal thermal shirt, gray field trousers, and black chemical-resistant boots. Her black hair, threaded lightly with silver, had been tied into a low knot that did not move in the wind. She did not pause to admire the lake. She looked first at the slope behind Harlan's house, then at the utility cover in the drainage cut, then at the new warehouses beyond the fence. "You have 2 suspected access points," she said, "one outside, one beneath the basement." "And no one has opened either?" "No." Leona looked at Harlan for a moment as if verifying that restraint was not something he had recently invented for her benefit. "Good." Dell arrived 5 minutes later carrying a metal thermos, her yellow folding ruler, and a canvas bag of copied maps. Calder watched both women from the porch. He wore his olive harness with the padded left shoulder and stood with his weight slightly shifted away from the stiff joint. Leona crouched several feet from him, but did not reach out. "Retired working dog?" "Industrial search," Harlan said. 8 years old." "Any known chemical detection training?" "No." "Then whatever he notices stays a behavioral observation. It does not become a laboratory result." Harlan nodded. "I know." Dell unscrewed her thermos. "He does, but it never hurts to disappoint him officially." Leona gave Dell the briefest glance, then returned to Harlan. "Walk me through everything in order, not what you think it means, what happened." They began in the kitchen. Harlan showed her the logbook, the photographs, the camera footage, the laboratory receipt, and the contract Meridian Crown had left behind. Leona listened without reacting to the rising purchase offers or the environmental waiver. She was more interested in times, temperatures, pipe locations, and whether anyone had handled the utility cover without gloves. When Harlan reached the 7-minute interruption in the camera feed, she asked to see the system log. "It could be deliberate," he said. "It could also be a bad power supply. It happened the same night the access was sealed." "That increases its importance. It does not change what it is." "A coincidence?" "An unanswered question." Leona's voice never hardened. She simply refused to let suspicion dress itself as fact. Harlan found that irritating. He also found that he trusted it. They moved into the basement. The room had been cleared around the welded plate. Harlan had opened the upper window slightly the night before, following Leona's instructions, but kept the basement door sealed from the rest of the house. A portable fan sat unused against the wall. Leona stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "No fan yet." "I thought ventilation was the point. Controlled ventilation. Not pulling unknown vapor through a motor or sending it into another part of the structure." She placed a black waterproof case on the workbench and opened it. Inside were meters, sealed tubing, sampling cartridges, labels, gloves, and tools arranged with a precision that made Harlan's own bench look careless. Dell leaned against the wall. "You always travel like the world is waiting to contaminate itself?" "The world does not need to wait." Leona fitted a probe to a handheld meter, checked the calibration, then approached the welded plate. She did not kneel directly over it. Instead, she positioned herself to one side and passed the probe along the seam. The meter remained quiet. Leona studied the weld. "We need a controlled opening no larger than necessary." Harlan held up the drill he had prepared. She looked at it. "No. It is low speed. It can still create heat, sparks, and a direct pathway." "What do you use?" "A hand punch through the softer weld bead, with extraction running away from us." She opened another case and removed a compact manual tool, connected to flexible tubing and a sealed collection unit. Harlan folded his arms. "You expected this exact situation?" "I expected somebody to have done something unwise to a confined space." Dell smiled into her coffee. Leona marked a point on the weld, fitted the extraction hood over it, and used the hand tool to create a narrow opening. The work was slow. Metal complained in small, dull sounds rather than the bright scream of a drill. Calder stood at the basement doorway above them. The first hollow vibration traveled through the plate, His ears flattened. Harlan looked back. Calder's front paws remained on the wooden landing, but his body had become rigid. The sound beneath the floor was close to the kind he remembered. Old metal, hidden emptiness, weight resting where it should not. Harlan started toward him. "Stay where you are," Leona said. "He's reacting." "So's the meter." The instrument gave a sharp series of tones. Leona raised one gloved hand. "No one moves closer." She read the display, changed settings, then checked it again. "Volatile organic compounds are elevated inside the void." "How elevated?" Dell asked. "High enough that nobody opens this plate and nobody goes down." Harlan looked at the sealed circle under his floor. "Can you identify the chemical?" "Not with this." "What can it tell you?" "That something volatile is present. It cannot tell me where it came from, how long it has been there, or who is responsible." She capped the test opening temporarily, then turned toward Calder. The dog had not retreated. He stood trembling slightly on the landing, still facing the basement.
Harlan climbed 2 steps and stopped below him. Calder looked at the metal plate, then at Harlan. "You do not need to come down," Harlan said. The dog remained where he was. Leona glanced up from her equipment. "He is afraid of the sound?" An old floor collapsed beneath him and his previous handler. "And he still came to the stairs." Harlan rested his hand on the wooden rail instead of reaching for Calder. "He has never confused fear with permission to abandon a post." The words sounded too much like something Harlan might have said about himself once. Calder lowered his head and stepped down one stair, then another. Harlan did not praise him. He simply moved aside and left a clear route back up. Calder reached the basement floor but stayed several feet from the plate. He positioned himself near Harlan's left leg, his body angled toward the exit. Leona watched the choice without comment. Then she said, "Protecting something does not require standing on top of the hazard." Harlan looked at her. She had already returned to the meter. They worked for the next 2 hours without opening the inspection cover. Leona installed a temporary extraction line through the small test hole and vented the gas through a filtered unit outside, positioned downwind and well away from Calder. She monitored the concentrations until they fell enough to permit remote sampling. The circular plate had a narrow service port beneath the welded rim, barely visible under corrosion. With Dell's help, Leona identified it from the old maintenance drawing. She fitted a sealed tube through the opening and lowered a small sampling device into the void. No one descended. No one put a face above the opening. The work was slower than Harlan wanted, and more exact than he would have managed alone. When the sampler returned, it held a small amount of dark water and several inches of layered sediment. The material was not uniform. Near the bottom lay dense gray grit. Above it, a narrow, rust-colored band, then a darker layer with an oily sheen. The uppermost material was almost black. Dell bent closer but kept her hands behind her back. "That did not happen in one afternoon." Leona placed the tube in a stand. "It suggests different deposition conditions. That is all I can say here." "You can see the layers," Harlan said. "I can see layers. I cannot assign dates, chemicals, or causes by looking." "Even the black one?" "Especially the black one." She photographed the core against a scale, recorded the depth and time, then divided the material into sealed containers according to protocol. Every label received a location code, sample number, time, collector's initials, and seal number. Dell signed as witness. Harlan filmed the process from a fixed position. Leona stopped him once. "Do not move closer to get a better angle." "The label is not visible." "The sample matters more than your footage." He stepped back. It was a small correction, but it irritated him more than he expected. For years, being useful had meant moving toward the problem. Here, every useful person seemed to be telling him that distance was part of the work. Calder settled near the stairs, watching. By noon, the first set of samples was packed into a cold shipping case for transport to a certified laboratory.
Leona retained duplicate controls and documented every transfer. Only after the case was sealed did she remove her gloves and accept coffee. Harlan stood at the basement workbench, looking at the welded plate. What would make the evidence strong enough? Leona took the cup Dell handed her. Not one dramatic result. What then? A pattern. She pointed toward the old map. We need samples from locations that can test the direction of movement. We need to know the gradient in the groundwater, the condition of the old pipes, and whether contaminants appear upstream, downstream, or both. And the port's records.
If the compounds match substances used at the port, that creates relevance. It does not establish release. Dell tapped the map with her ruler. Pressure logs? Yes, valve operations, maintenance records, chemical purchases, spill reports, weather data, anything that establishes when material could have entered the system. Harlan looked at the dark sample case. So the water cannot tell the story. It can tell part of it, Leona said. Water moves. Records tell us who had their hands on the valves. That sentence stayed with him, not because it revealed anything, but because it changed the shape of the problem. Until then, Harlan had thought of the old system as something buried and passive. Leona treated it as a witness whose memory had been separated into different places. The sediment remembered what passed through. The maps remembered where it could travel. The company records would remember who had made it move, if those records still existed. Calder rose abruptly. He did not look toward the plate. He moved to a low ventilation opening near the far basement wall and sniffed the concrete beneath it. Then he turned, crossed to Harlan, and touched his nose to Harlan's glove. A smear of dark mud marked the leather. Harlan crouched beside the vent. There was more beneath the metal grill. Damp, black residue pressed into the dust, along with a partial boot mark. Dell lowered herself carefully beside him. That did not come through the pipe. Leona set down her cup. Do not touch it. She photographed the residue before taking a surface sample. The boot impression was incomplete, but the tread showed a broken chevron near the heel, the same defect Harlan had photographed in the snow behind the house. He stood. Someone came inside. Or reached through the vent, Leona said. The access is too narrow for a person. Then perhaps for a tool? Harlan checked the basement window latch. It was secure, but the exterior vent cover had been loosened recently. One screw had fresh marks around its head. Outside, the mud trail was faint beneath the snow, protected in places by the foundation overhang. It led toward the rear slope. Harlan followed it with Calder on a short lead. This time, he did not descend into the drainage cut. He stopped at the property boundary and photographed the route from several angles. The trail disappeared near the old utility cover. When they returned inside, Harlan opened the camera files from the previous night and reviewed them frame by frame. At 1:43 a.m., a figure appeared near the rear fence. The person wore a gray-blue industrial jacket with silver reflective strips across the shoulders and sleeves. Snow and distance obscured the face. The figure remained visible for fewer than 12 seconds before moving outside the camera's field. Harlan enlarged the image. There was a small rectangular logo on the upper sleeve. Dell leaned closer. That is not standard dock labor. You recognize it? The stripe pattern. Compliance and inspection teams wear those. Operations crews use orange. Meridian crown? Dell nodded. Leona stood behind them. A uniform does not identify a person. It identifies access, Harlan said. It suggests access. Do not make me keep correcting the same word. Before he could answer, his phone rang. The caller introduced himself as an administrative clerk from the Northglass Building Safety Office. The city had received an engineering assessment regarding possible soil instability beneath Harlan's property. A formal inspection was still scheduled, but officials were now considering an emergency hazard order. If the foundation was determined unsafe, Harlan could be required to leave the property until remediation occurred. How was the ground assessed? Harlan asked. I only have the filing. Did anyone test beneath the house? I cannot answer that. Who submitted the report?
The clerk named the same engineering firm Meridian Crown had used. Harlan looked at Leona while listening. The timeline was tightening. After the call, Leona returned to the service port and used a borescope to inspect the visible section of piping below. Most of the interior lay beyond reach, but the camera captured a corroded valve body with a stamped identification plate. Leona froze the image. "Read that." Dell adjusted her glasses. NG14B. She searched the old paper map. The number appeared beside a branch crossing the port's solvent maintenance zone. Harlan opened the current environmental filing Meridian Crown had attached to its development plan. He had downloaded it when the purchase negotiations began, more out of suspicion than understanding. The same branch was listed there. Status isolated. No active hydraulic connection. Leona read the statement twice. If this line is fully isolated, liquid should not be reaching the inspection point through normal flow. But it is, Harlan said. We have liquid beneath your house. We do not yet know the route. Dell pointed to the valve code. Someone welded the access shut and left the line where it could still collect water. Possibly. Dell frowned. Do you ever say yes when the evidence does? The laboratory called shortly before evening. The analysis was preliminary and limited to screening compounds, but the water and upper sediment contained several industrial substances: a glycol-based antifreeze compound, a metal cleaning agent, and a chlorinated solvent commonly used in equipment maintenance. Leona put the call on speaker and took notes. When it ended, Harlan asked the question already waiting in the room. Are those used at the port? They are consistent with materials listed in Meridian Crown's public handling records, Leona said. Dell looked toward the window, beyond which the warehouse roofs had begun disappearing into blue winter dusk. So that is it. No, Leona said. The word fell hard. Dell turned toward her. Leona remained calm. It is serious. It just is not complete. She began listing what they still lacked. Direction of groundwater flow, samples from points beyond Harlan's property, pressure and valve operation logs, chemical purchase and disposal records, evidence showing whether the material had entered through the port system or another industrial source, documentation identifying anyone who had approached the access points. Harlan listened until the list ended. The preliminary result had not brought the certainty he expected. It had made the uncertainty more dangerous. There was contamination. There was a pipe officially listed as isolated. There was a fresh weld over an old sampling point. There was a person in Meridian Crown compliance clothing near the property at night. Yet none of those facts, alone or together, answered the final question strongly enough to survive denial. Leona packed her notes. I will arrange additional sampling tomorrow. Tonight, nobody enters the basement without a meter. Calder stays upstairs. The door remains sealed. Harlan looked toward the welded plate. And if the city orders me out, we document the condition before anyone touches it. It was not reassurance. It was a procedure. After Dell and Leona left, Harlan fed Calder bottled water and warmed food in the kitchen. Outside, the temperature dropped rapidly. The new warehouses glowed behind the fencing, white lights reflecting from the snow. At 9:30, Calder went to the back door. He did not show alarm. He simply stood there, listening. Harlan checked the camera feed. No figure appeared. He put on his coat and stepped onto the porch with Calder beside him. A plain brown envelope rested against the inside of the rear fence, protected from the snow by a narrow board. There was no name on it, no postage. Harlan photographed it before touching it, then carried it inside with gloved hands. The envelope contained a folded technical diagram. It showed the solvent storage area inside Meridian Crown's port property, including several lines absent from the public plan. One branch was marked in red, NG14B. At the bottom of the page, someone had written a single sentence in block letters. Do not let them destroy the well before valve 14B is checked. Harlan read it twice. Calder stood beside him, amber eyes fixed not on the paper, but on the dark window beyond it. For the first time, the person moving through the night did not appear to be trying to silence the house. Someone inside the port wanted it to keep speaking.
The message arrived 12 minutes after midnight. No greeting, no name.
Boat Repair Shed 6, East Service Road, 10 tomorrow morning. Come alone if you want to know what 14B means. Harlan read it twice before showing it to Leona. She was still at his kitchen table finishing the transfer forms for the sediment samples. Dell stood at the counter with her coat on, refusing to leave until the basement monitor had remained stable for a full hour. "You are not going alone," Leona said. "The message says alone. The person who left an undocumented technical drawing behind your fence does not get to establish safety protocol." Dell pulled on one glove. "I can wait outside." "No," Harlan said. Both women looked at him. He set the phone on the table. "If someone inside Meridian Crown is frightened enough to communicate this way, arriving with a procession will end the conversation before it begins." "And arriving without support may end more than the conversation?" Leona replied. Harlan considered the dark kitchen window. Calder lay beside the basement door, awake despite the hour, his uneven ears angled toward the room. "I'll take Calder. You'll have the location. I'll keep the phone recording." Dell frowned. "That is your idea of compromise? It is tonight." Leona did not approve, but she stopped arguing when she realized Harlan had not dismissed the risk. He had modified the plan instead of simply refusing help. That was not the same as wisdom, but it was closer than he had once been willing to come. The next morning, Northglass woke beneath a sky the color of unpolished steel. Boat Repair Shed 6 stood beyond the active marina, separated from the port by a road lined with stacked hulls and shrink-wrapped vessels waiting for spring. The shed had not been used in years. Frost silvered its windows, and one sliding door remained open by several inches. Harlan parked where the truck could not be blocked in. Calder stepped down wearing his olive harness. His paws made little sound on the packed snow. Inside, the shed smelled of old wood, cold fiberglass, and engine oil. A stripped fishing boat rested on supports in the center. Light came through gaps in the metal siding, cutting the dusty interior into narrow, pale columns. A man stood near the far workbench. He was thinner than Harlan expected, with sloping shoulders beneath a brown parka and a face that seemed built from held breath. His dark hair had gone heavily gray and had been combed back with more care than the wind allowed. He carried no bag, only an old gray engineering calculator in one hand. "Mr. Whitaker?" "Harlan." The man looked at Calder, then at the open door behind them. "My name is Nathaniel Sorn." "Compliance Division?" Nathaniel's expression changed. "You saw the jacket." "I saw enough of it." Nathaniel lowered his eyes to the calculator. His fingers moved across the worn plastic without pressing a key. "I was at your property," he said. "I did not enter the house." "You loosened the vent!" "No." "You knew where the basement access was?" "Yes." Harlan waited. Nathaniel seemed to have prepared a speech, but the silence damaged its structure. When he finally spoke again, the words came without polish. "I left the drawing because your well is the only sampling access I know of that Meridian Crown does not control." "Why?" "The others were capped, incorporated into new construction, or placed inside restricted zones." "And mine was forgotten?" "Not forgotten." The correction was almost a whisper. Nathaniel crossed to a dusty drafting table and unfolded a photocopied diagram. Unlike the page left at Harlan's fence, this one carried dates and revision marks. 3 years ago, during the January pressure event, this line was still connected. Harlan placed his phone on the table, recording openly. "What pressure event?" Nathaniel looked toward the door again. "A winter storm stalled 2 freight trains and froze part of the unloading system." The solvent maintenance zone had heated storage tanks, but the transfer lines began losing temperature. Pressure rose in one section after a control valve failed to cycle. What was in the line? Glycol solution, cleaning solvent, rinse water, possibly metal treatment residue. The exact composition depended on which maintenance process had last used the shared return. You do not know? I know what should have been there. That is not always the same thing. Calder stood beside Harlan, watching Nathaniel's hands. Nathaniel pointed to the diagram. Gideon Mercer ordered a diversion through 14B. Who is Gideon Mercer? Operations manager for chemical systems. He had authority over the maintenance yard during emergencies. Where did the diverted material go? Nathaniel swallowed. At the time, we were told it entered an inactive containment branch. But it did not. I do not know where all of it went. Harlan felt his jaw tighten. Nathaniel continued before he could speak. The sensor data did not match the report afterward. Pressure fell faster than the calculated capacity of the containment branch. I raised the discrepancy. Gideon said one of the sensors had iced over and produced false readings. And you accepted that. I accepted a revised report. You signed it. Yes. The single word had no defense around it. Harlan moved closer to the table. Did you verify the original logs? No. Did you inspect 14B? No. Did you report the discrepancy outside your department? No. Nathaniel's grip on the calculator tightened. Harlan had seen men protect themselves with explanations, procedure, rank, bad memory, and the passive voice. Nathaniel used none of them. His silence admitted more than an excuse would have. Why not? Harlan asked. Because the port would have shut down during the busiest winter week in 6 years. Because every manager in the room said the readings were wrong. Because I had been there 8 months and Gideon had been running those systems for 15 years. That explains the pressure. It does not excuse the signature. Harlan looked at him. Nathaniel's eyes remained lowered, but his voice had steadied. I signed because I wanted the problem to become somebody else's responsibility. The sentence changed the air between them. Not because it made Nathaniel sympathetic, it did not. It made him recognizable. Harlan thought of the Shoreline meetings he had left years earlier. He had not falsified a report. He had not operated a valve. But he understood the relief of deciding that uncertainty belonged to someone else. Nathaniel turned the calculator over in his hand. For a long time, I believed the revised report, or I practiced believing it. Then the expansion project reached your block. What changed? I was asked to review old utility conflicts. The digital maps showed 14B isolated. The original pressure diagrams showed a possible connection to the residential drainage system. And the logs? Different. Different how? Timestamps altered. Several entries replaced with summary values. The raw sensor file existed in the archive until 6 weeks ago. What happened 6 weeks ago? My access was revoked. After you questioned it? After I filed an internal non-conformance notice. Harlan studied Nathaniel's face. No triumph, no courage newly discovered. Only exhaustion. What did the company say? That I had exceeded the scope of my review. Human resources reminded me of confidentiality provisions. Gideon said the old branch had already been addressed and that continued inquiry could interfere with the property clearance schedule. And then someone welded my well shut. Nathaniel looked up. I learned about the contractor after it happened. Which contractor? Bayline Industrial Stabilization. Harlan knew the name. Bayline equipment had appeared on several Meridian Crown construction sites. What were they hired to do? Officially, secure obsolete access points and reduce infiltration risk. Unofficially, Nathaniel shook his head. I was not in those meetings. But you suspect Gideon. I know he issued the work request. I cannot prove what instructions he gave. Harlan felt anger arrive not as heat, but as a narrowing of the room. You had 3 years. Nathaniel did not step back. Yes. You had reports from the neighborhood. I saw summaries. You saw enough to ask. Yes. And now that your access is gone and your own name is on the report, you come to me. Yes. The answers made Harlan angrier than denial would have. You are not here to save the neighborhood, he said. You are here because the paper trail ends at your signature. Nathaniel's hand began to tremble around the calculator. I am here partly because of that. Partly? I have a mortgage. I have a sister whose medical care depends on the insurance attached to my job. I am afraid of being sued. I am afraid of losing everything. None of that makes the water cleaner. Harlan took another step. Calder moved. The dog did not place himself in front of Nathaniel. He did not press against Harlan's knee as he sometimes did at the house. He walked into the space between them and sat sideways, facing neither man completely. The choice forced Harlan to stop. Calder looked first at him, then at Nathaniel. Nathaniel's breathing had become shallow. His fingers shook visibly now, the calculator tapping against his coat zipper. Calder rose, crossed the remaining distance, and lowered his gray muzzle onto Nathaniel's knee. Nathaniel went still. He did not reach for the dog. For several seconds, the only sound in the shed was wind pushing loose metal against the roof. I do not deserve that, Nathaniel said. Harlan looked at Calder's amber eyes. He is not issuing a verdict. Nathaniel's mouth tightened. No. I suppose not. The dog remained there until Nathaniel's hand stopped shaking. That moment did not soften the facts. Nathaniel had signed the report. He had stayed quiet. His fear had cost other people time they could not recover. But Harlan could no longer reduce him to a name on a page. Tell me what you can prove, Harlan said. Nathaniel lifted his head. I can identify the tanker numbers used that week. I can give you the contractor's name, the maintenance schedule, and the locations where comparison samples may still be possible. I remember the original pressure sequence well enough to reconstruct part of it. Copies? Not of the raw logs. Emails? Some metadata, no full messages. Why should anyone believe your memory? They should not by itself. That answer satisfied Harlan more than anything else Nathaniel had said. Nathaniel wrote 3 tanker identification numbers, 2 work order references, and the name of a retired control room operator on the back of the diagram. Do not use my name with the operator yet, he said. You do not set the terms. I know, I am asking. Harlan folded the page. You will speak to Leona Maris. Nathaniel's face tightened. The hydrologist? You know who she is. I know Meridian Crown's legal department discussed her after a watershed case. You will speak to her and then to a lawyer. Nathaniel looked toward the open shed door. If I do that, there is no going back. Harlan glanced at Calder. There was no going back when you signed. Nathaniel accepted the words without protest. Leona met them that afternoon at Dell's shop rather than Harlan's house. Nathaniel arrived separately and spent nearly 2 hours pointing out possible sampling locations on the old maps. Leona did not treat him as a whistleblower or a criminal. She treated him as a source whose information required verification. She marked 1 point upstream of the solvent yard, 2 downstream, and another near an abandoned pressure chamber. If contamination appears only below the maintenance zone, that matters, she said. If it appears above it too, the source may be broader. Nathaniel nodded. Dell called the retired control room operator using the name he had provided. The man, Walter Bryce, refused to discuss the incident by phone, but confirmed that the old residential branch had not been physically removed when the station closed. That evening, Harlan visited Miriam Holt Quaid. Her legal aid office occupied the 2nd floor above a pharmacy near the courthouse. Miriam was 58, with natural brown curls threaded with silver and rectangular tortoiseshell glasses. She wore a charcoal blazer over a dark plum turtleneck and listened without interrupting while Harlan described the welded well, the laboratory screening, the city notice, and Nathaniel's statement. When he finished, she placed a small digital stopwatch on the desk and pressed a button. "What is that for?" Harlan asked. "To establish how long it takes before you interrupt my legal advice." Dell, seated beside him, covered a smile. Miriam opened the city's preliminary hazard file. "The engineering report does not authorize demolition of your entire house," she said. "It recommends temporary evacuation if instability is confirmed and removal of the affected structural section." The affected section is the basement floor. "According to the company's interpretation." "Can they enter?" "Not without city authorization or your consent, unless officials determine there is an immediate threat to public safety." "What if they call the well a threat?"
Then our problem becomes proving that preserving it is safer than destroying it. Miriam read the engineering firm's disclosure page. "This firm also has a materials testing contract on another Meridian Crown project." "Conflict of interest?" Harlan asked. "Not automatically. Relevant? Yes. Illegal? Not from this alone." Dell folded her arms. "Everyone in this story likes disappointing him with careful language." "Careful language is how facts survive angry rooms," Miriam said. She explained what they needed next: an independent structural assessment, strict documentation of the samples, copies stored outside the house, and a sworn statement from Nathaniel that separated direct knowledge from suspicion. "We cannot stop an entire development project because someone handed you a diagram in a boat shed," she said. "We may be able to prevent them from destroying a specific access point while regulators examine it." "That is enough for now," Miriam studied him. "It must be." People lose cases by asking the first hearing to solve the whole world. 2 days later, Corbin Strake returned. He came alone, carrying no attorney's folder. Snow dusted the shoulders of his navy parka, but his steel-gray hair remained precisely in place. Harlan met him on the porch. Strake handed him a new offer: 3 times the assessed value of the house. Relocation expenses, 10 days to leave. The environmental waiver remained. "You can walk away with dignity," Strake said. "You can buy somewhere quieter. You can avoid being used by people who see your property as leverage." "Who is using me?" "Consultants, attorneys, former residents with old grievances, perhaps employees trying to protect themselves." The last phrase was deliberate. "You know about Nathaniel." "I know internal information has been mishandled." "Was the pressure report false?" Strake's expression did not shift. "I am not qualified to interpret old sensor data." "But you are qualified to build over it." "The project has passed every required review." "Required by whom?" "By agencies whose authority does not depend on whether you trust them." Harlan looked past Strake at the empty lots. Snow had covered the foundations of the demolished houses, but he could still remember where porch steps had stood. A week earlier, the argument had been simple to him. This was his home. He had paid for it. Meridian Crown had no right to force him out. That argument remained true. It was no longer large enough. "I thought you wanted my house," Harlan said. Strake waited. "I thought this was about whether one man had the right to stay where he chose." "And now?" Harlan looked toward the kitchen window. Calder stood behind the glass, watching. "Now there is a sampling well under my floor connected to a system your company says does not connect to anything." "That has not been established." "No, but it has been preserved." Strake's thumb turned the titanium ring on his hand. Harlan held out the offer without opening it. "What is beneath that house does not belong only to me anymore. It is still private property. It is evidence for every person who opened a tap in Shoreline Ward and was told nothing was wrong." Strake did not take the envelope immediately. When he finally did, his voice was quieter. "You are choosing a fight that may consume the rest of your life." Harlan thought of Nathaniel in the cold boat shed, admitting that fear had made the decision for him 3 years earlier. "No," he said. "I am choosing not to sign the report after someone else writes it."
Strake's eyes held his for several seconds. Then he turned and walked back through the snow. Calder waited until the car disappeared before leaving the window. Harlan opened the door and let him onto the porch. The dog stood beside him, muzzle silver in the late winter light, while the harbor cranes moved beyond the empty neighborhood. The house was still Harlan's. But the reason it had to remain standing no longer was Miriam did not allow the laboratory results to become a headline. That disappointed nearly everyone except Leona. The preliminary findings had already begun circulating in fragments. Industrial solvent beneath Shoreline Ward, a sealed sampling well, altered utility maps, an employee inside Meridian Crown willing to talk. In a town the size of Northglass, facts did not need to be public before they became conversation. They only needed to pass through a diner, a repair shop, or the waiting room of a clinic. Harlan wanted to release everything, not because he wanted attention. He wanted the company to know the evidence was no longer hidden. Miriam sat at his dining table with her tortoiseshell glasses low on her nose and a tablet open beside 3 legal pads. "If you make the accusation before the record is ready," she said, "Meridian Crown will not argue about the water. They will argue about your handling of the water. The seals are documented. The first household samples were collected by you. For screening. I know that. A company attorney will say otherwise in 6 different ways." Dell stood near the stove, sorting maintenance sheets by year. "So we say nothing?" "We say exactly what we can support," Miriam replied. "There is a suspected environmental hazard. Independent testing is underway. The inspection access must be preserved." "That sounds weak," Harlan said. "It sounds defensible." Leona, labeling a new set of sample containers, did not look up. "Defensible lasts longer than dramatic." Harlan disliked being outnumbered in his own house. He disliked even more that they were right. The dining room had changed in less than a week. Harlan had always kept the table nearly empty, salt, a ceramic bowl, 1 folded newspaper. Now it was covered with maps, copied reports, evidence logs, laptop chargers, and waterproof file boxes. Coats hung from chairbacks. Wet boots lined the kitchen wall without regard for the order in which Harlan preferred things to exist. Calder lay beneath the table, his head resting across Harlan's left boot. The pressure was gentle. The message was not. Stay. So Harlan stayed. They began building the record piece by piece. Dell brought pump service logs going back 14 years, including pressure complaints and handwritten notes from properties that no longer existed. She had photographed old valves during repairs because, as she explained, cities forgot machinery faster than machinery forgot cities. Nathaniel arrived after dark to sign his sworn declaration. Miriam made him separate every statement into one of 3 categories: what he had personally observed, what he had read in company records, and what he suspected. Nathaniel tried several times to combine them. Miriam stopped him each time. "You are not helping us by sounding more certain than you are." "I remember the pressure drop." "Then say you remember it." "I know Gideon ordered the diversion. Did you hear him?" "I saw the operational note." "Then say that." Nathaniel removed his glasses and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "I understand." "No," Miriam said. "You are beginning to." Leona planned additional sampling points, using the old maps and Nathaniel's technical references. One location lay upstream of Meridian Crown's solvent yard. 2 others followed the buried line towards Shoreline Ward. If the same compounds appeared only after the industrial zone, the pattern would matter more than any single dramatic sample. Harlan's assignment sounded simpler. Find the people who had lived there. It was not simple. Dell gave him a list of former residents and old business owners. Some had moved across Northglass. Others lived in neighboring counties. Several had no reason to answer a call from the man who had declined to stand with them when the first complaints began. Maeve Larkin Sutter answered on the 3rd ring. "I heard your house finally developed a conscience," she said, Her voice had not softened with age. Harlan remembered Maeve as the owner of Shoreline Suds, the neighborhood laundromat that had once occupied the corner near the old pressure station. She had been small, sharp-faced, and impossible to ignore in a public meeting. Her questions arrived faster than officials could redirect them. "I need to talk to you," Harlan said. "You needed to talk 10 years ago." "I know." A pause followed. Not forgiveness, surprise. Maeve arrived the next morning carrying a dented blue tin box beneath one arm. At 66, she was smaller than Harlan remembered, but she held herself as straight as a survey stake. Her white-gray hair was cut in a long pixie style, and a teal wool coat made her pale blue eyes look even sharper. She entered the house without offering her hand. Calder approached at an angle. Maeve studied him. "This the dog everyone says found the drain?" "He found a trail." "Good. At least one of you knows how to follow what is in front of him." Harlan accepted the blow. Maeve noticed. Her mouth tightened, almost disappointed that he had not defended himself. She set the tin box on the dining table. It made a small metallic sound that silenced the room. Inside were receipts, repair estimates, letters, photographs, and copies of complaints sent to the city. The papers had been folded and refolded so many times that the creases had become part of the record. Maeve pulled out an invoice for 2 commercial washing machine valves. "Replaced both within 18 months, she said. "The technician said the deposits were unusual." Another receipt documented a new water heater. Another showed months of bottled water purchases. Then came letters. The city's responses were polite and almost identical. "No verified system-wide issue. Continue monitoring. Contact the utility if odor persists." "You kept everything," Leona said. "I owned a laundromat. Receipts were the closest thing I had to religion." Maeve looked at Harlan. "I came to your door 3 times. "I remember." "You said the pressure in your house was normal." "It was." "You said one good line did not prove a bad system." "That was also true." Maeve's eyes hardened. "And because you could not prove all of it, you helped us prove none of it." The room went still. Harlan could have explained his reasoning. The complaints varied, the city had tested some houses, no one had presented a clear pathway from the port, he had been trained to distrust conclusions built from incomplete reports. All of that was true. None of it, answered Maeve. "I thought staying out of it made me neutral," he said. Maeve waited. "It made me useful to the people who wanted the complaints kept separate." No speech followed, no request for absolution. Maeve closed the tin box. "You do not get forgiven because you finally found the correct sentence." "I know." She looked at him for several seconds, then reopened the box. "Good. We can work with that." The moment did not reconcile them. It did something more useful. It allowed them to continue. Maeve called former residents who would not have answered Harlan. By afternoon, documents began arriving through email and in person. A retired machinist brought photographs of orange residue inside a water heater. A former dock accountant produced yearly bottled water receipts. A woman who had lived near the southern drainage line provided veterinary records showing that her elderly dog repeatedly refused tap water during 2 specific winter periods. Leona carefully marked those records as anecdotal rather than scientific evidence, but added the dates to the timeline. Another resident brought a city meeting transcript in which an official promised to compare neighborhood complaints with port maintenance events. No follow-up report had ever been issued. Individually, the papers looked ordinary. Together, they began to form a pattern of pressure changes, equipment damage, odors, animal reactions, and official reassurances clustered around the same periods. Harlan watched his dining room fill with people who had once lived within walking distance of his porch. Some greeted him, some did not. No one called him a hero. He was grateful for that. Jonas Creed Halpern arrived near dusk. The Great Lakes investigative reporter was 44, narrow through the shoulders, with dark curling hair graying near his ears and a short beard marked by a white patch beneath his lower lip. He carried a canvas camera bag, but did not remove the camera. "I am not here to publish laboratory results you are not ready to release," he told Miriam. "Then why are you here?" Harlan asked. to make sure the only copy of the story is not stored inside the building someone once declared unsafe. Jonas placed an old silver recorder on the table in full view. He asked permission before turning it on. That earned him more trust than a press credential would have. Miriam provided copies of public filings, photographs already documented, and Nathaniel's declaration with sensitive sections withheld. Jonas received no original samples and no access to the sealed basement area. He stored encrypted copies on 2 drives. One remained with him. The second would be placed with his editor outside Northglass. "The house can still matter without being the only place the truth lives," he said. Harlan looked around the room. For days he had acted as though preserving the evidence meant keeping everything beneath his roof. Now the roof was becoming the vulnerability. The thought unsettled him. Calder left his place beneath the table and followed Maeve toward the back porch when she stepped outside for a cigarette. Through the window, Harlan saw her stand beneath the eave while the dog sat beside her, facing the snow. Maeve did not pet him. After a while, she took a folded wool pad from her bag and placed it on the porch boards. "For your shoulder," she said. Calder looked at the pad, then at her. He lay down on it. Harlan turned away before Maeve noticed him watching. That night, the temperature fell hard. At 1:18 a.m., the sound of running water woke him, not a drip, pressure. He reached the kitchen to find Calder already at the back door. The dog's body was tense, but he waited for Harlan to attach the lead. Outside, water sprayed from the service line near the north foundation. It struck the stone wall, ran across the ground, and froze in spreading layers. Harlan shut the exterior valve, but the damaged section was upstream of it. The cut in the pipe was fresh and wide, not a crack this time, a deliberate break. Harlan called the utility emergency line, then Miriam. He did not call Meridian Crown. He did not follow the immediate urge to cross the rear slope and confront whoever had done it. Calder lowered his nose to the snow. Fresh boot prints led from the broken pipe to the rear fence, the same industrial tread, the same damaged chevron at the heel. Harlan started after them, camera in one hand, lead in the other. At the drainage cut, Calder descended slowly. The trail continued beside the old utility cover, along a buried concrete channel, and toward the port's technical boundary. A figure moved beyond the fence. Harlan saw only the back of an orange industrial jacket before it disappeared behind a service building. He could have climbed the low section of fencing. The gate stood less than 50 yards away. His body had already chosen the route before his mind interrupted. Calder stopped. The dog did not block him. He simply looked back toward the house. Water continued running somewhere behind them. Cameras were recording. Residents' documents lay inside. Leona's equipment remained in the basement. The entire record depended on Harlan not turning himself into the easiest part of the story to discredit. He raised the phone and filmed the footprints instead. The route, the broken tread, the utility cover, the technical gate, a vehicle number visible through the fence. Then he called Miriam again. "I have a trail to a port access gate. Are you on port property?" "No. Stay that way." He looked through the fence at the place where the figure had vanished. All right. The agreement cost him something. That was how he knew it mattered. By morning, ice had formed thickly around the north foundation. The emergency utility crew had isolated the damaged service, but photographs made the house look far more unstable than it had the day before. An inspector arrived shortly after 9. He measured the ice, photographed the foundation, and said little. At noon, Miriam received the order. The city had classified the property as a potential immediate structural hazard. Beginning at 5 the following morning, officials could isolate the site and authorize removal of any section deemed at risk of collapse. The language did not approve demolition of the whole house. It did not need to. The basement floor and north wall sat directly above the inspection well. Nathaniel called 10 minutes later. "Bayline has mobilized equipment," he said. "Gideon moved the crew schedule forward." "How early?" "Before dawn." Miriam filed an emergency electronic request for a temporary stay. She attached Leona's preliminary assessment, the independent structural opinion, Nathaniel's declaration, and the new footage of the pipe break. No judge had reviewed it yet. Audra Pell, the state environmental inspector assigned to the case, was driving toward Northglass from Lansing. A snowstorm had closed part of the highway north of Grayling. She could not promise when she would arrive. The house grew quiet after the last resident left. Boxes remained stacked against the dining room wall. Copies of evidence had already gone with Jonas and Miriam. The original sealed samples were no longer stored in the house. Harlan stood at the window looking at the new ice around the foundation. Calder came beside him. Beyond Shoreline Ward, lights moved inside the courtyard. Heavy machinery was being positioned where the old houses had once stood. For most of his life, Harlan had believed a defensive position became stronger when one man understood every entrance. Tonight, too many people knew the truth for the house to belong to him alone. But the physical evidence beneath it still had only one roof. He turned from the window. There were fewer than 12 hours until the order took effect, and no court had yet told the machines to stop. By midnight, Harlan's house no longer felt like a home preparing for sleep. It felt like a place learning how to remain visible. Miriam stood in the dining room with her coat still on, reading the emergency order for the fourth time. Her digital stopwatch sat beside the legal pads, ready to mark every call, arrival, warning, and change in the condition of the property. "No one blocks a vehicle," she said. "No one touches a worker. No one threatens an official, even if that official is wrong." Dell tightened a cable tie around a bundle of extension cords. "What if they are aggressively wrong?" "Record them aggressively." Maeve sat near the window, sorting fresh batteries into labeled bags. Jonas worked at the far end of the table, checking the encrypted uploads from the outdoor cameras. Leona had taken over the basement monitor, where the air readings and water level sensor appeared as thin lines across a laptop screen. Harlan listened from the kitchen doorway. Miriam looked directly at him. "And you do not turn this house into a personal battlefield." "I heard you. I know you heard me. I am waiting to learn whether you agreed." Harlan glanced at the old depth watch on his wrist. "I agree." The words did not come easily. That was why Miriam believed them. The plan had been designed to preserve evidence without giving Meridian Crown a reason to describe the group as obstructive. One camera faced the road and broadcast publicly through Jonas's news site. Anyone could see the property line, the arriving vehicles, and the front of the house. The basement cameras did not stream to the public. Their encrypted feeds went only to Miriam, Jonas, Leona, and Audra Pell at the State Environmental Office. The original samples had already been moved to certified storage. Duplicate control samples remained sealed in a locked cooler, each label signed by Leona, Dell, and Maeve. A portable generator stood beneath a ventilated shelter behind the shed. The utility company had confirmed that power might be disconnected once the work crew arrived, supposedly to reduce electrical hazards. Miriam had demanded the request in writing. The old residents of Shoreline Ward had agreed to remain on the public shoulder across the street. They could film, witness, and speak to officials. They could not stand in the road or touch the machinery. Near 1 in the morning, an independent structural engineer emailed his preliminary opinion. The ice around the north foundation required attention, but the building showed no visible signs of immediate collapse. He recommended stabilization and further inspection, not emergency destruction of the basement floor. Miriam attached the report to the pending court application. Still, no judge had ruled. The snow thickened outside. Nathaniel sat alone at the end of the dining table, reviewing his sworn declaration. His gray calculator rested beside his hand, unused. He had corrected dates, separated memory from documentation, and identified every claim he could not independently verify. The final page remained unsigned. At 1:37 a.m., his phone rang. The screen displayed Corbin Strake's name. Everyone in the room saw it. Nathaniel stood and carried the phone into the kitchen. He did not ask for privacy, but the others returned to their work and allowed him the appearance of it. He answered. Harlan heard only Nathaniel's side. "Yes?" "No, I have not sent company documents. That is not what happened." A longer silence. Nathaniel looked toward the back door. "I understand the clause." His shoulders seemed to narrow beneath his brown sweater. No. Another pause. What do you mean by resolved? Harlan watched Nathaniel close his eyes. The call lasted less than 4 minutes. When it ended, Nathaniel remained beside the kitchen counter with the phone held loosely at his side. What did he offer? Miriam asked. Nathaniel turned. They will not pursue a confidentiality claim if I leave the property before the work begins and withdraw my declaration. Dell made a sound under her breath. Miriam's expression did not change. Anything in writing? No. Then the offer may disappear as soon as you step outside. Nathaniel nodded as if he had already considered that. They know about my mortgage. They know my sister is listed on my health plan. Harlan looked at him. Would leaving protect her? For a while. And staying? Nathaniel gave a tired, almost embarrassed laugh. I do not know. The room had no good answer for him. Maeve continued sorting batteries, but more slowly now. Leona watched from behind the laptop. Jonas did not touch his recorder. Harlan crossed to the front door and opened it. Cold air entered at once, carrying snow across the threshold. Nathaniel looked at him. You can leave, Harlan said. Dell turned sharply. Harlan kept his eyes on Nathaniel. No one in this room gets to make your decision respectable by making it for you. Nathaniel stared through the open doorway at the empty street. Beyond it, port lights glowed behind the falling snow. Calder stood several feet away. The dog did not block the door. He did not approach Nathaniel or perform the quiet gesture that had steadied him in the boat shed. He simply watched. Nathaniel looked at the dog for a long time. I spent 3 years telling myself I would speak when I had more proof, he said. Then I told myself I would speak when I had less to lose. No one interrupted. I kept waiting for the truthful choice to become the safe one. He stepped away from the door. Harlan closed it. Nathaniel returned to the table, picked up Miriam's pen, and signed the final page. Miriam noted the time, 2:04 a.m. Nothing in the room changed visibly. The storm did not ease, the court did not answer, Nathaniel's mortgage remained due. But one uncertainty had ended. At 3:15, Leona's water level monitor gave a brief fluctuation and settled. She leaned closer to the screen. Could be temperature compensation. Could be flow? Dell asked. Too small to say. They had installed the sensor because Nathaniel believed valve 14B could still influence the old branch. If someone attempted to flush the line or force water toward the sampling access, the level beneath the basement should change before the effects became visible above ground. Harlan checked the basement camera. The sealed plate remained dry. Calder slept near the hallway, but not deeply. His paws twitched at every metallic sound from the heating pipes. At 4, former Shoreline residents began arriving across the road. They came quietly, parking farther down the street and walking the final distance with cameras beneath their coats. Maeve joined them long enough to review the rules, then returned to the house. No signs, no chanting, no dramatic line of bodies across the snow. Only witnesses. At 4:39, yellow light appeared beyond the demolished lots. The convoy moved slowly toward the house. First came a city utility vehicle. Behind it rolled 2 Bayline trucks, a compact excavator loaded on a flatbed, and a black Meridian Crown SUV. Amber beacons swept across the snow and briefly illuminated the blue-gray siding of Harlan's house. The public camera feed showed everything. The vehicle stopped at the edge of the property. A city building officer stepped out carrying a clipboard beneath a clear plastic cover. 2 private security workers followed. Neither displayed a weapon. Gideon Pike Mercer climbed from one of the Bayline trucks. Harlan recognized him immediately from Nathaniel's description. Gideon was broad and heavy through the chest, with a short, thinning cap of brown blonde hair and a trimmed beard already wet with snow. He wore an orange industrial jacket with charcoal shoulders and a yellow radio clipped high on his chest. He moved as if the work had begun before anyone else arrived and everyone was already behind. Corbin Strake emerged from the black SUV. His navy parka looked almost untouched by the storm. Miriam stood inside the front door with the order in one hand and her phone in the other. "Remember," she said, "they may enter the yard if the city officer authorizes it. They may not exceed the order." Harlan pulled on his waxed navy coat over the olive combat shirt. Calder rose. "You stay with Leona unless I call you," Harlan said. The dog's amber eyes held his. This time, Calder did not follow him to the porch. Harlan stepped outside alone. Snow struck his face in fine, hard grains. The city officer introduced himself and read from the emergency order. The site would be isolated. The north foundation and adjoining basement section would be assessed. Any material presenting an immediate collapse risk could be removed. Miriam joined Harlan on the porch. "We acknowledge the order," she said. "We dispute that it authorizes destruction of the inspection well, or removal of evidence connected to the state environmental inquiry." Strake looked toward the cameras. "This is a safety operation, not a public performance." Jonas's voice came from across the road. "Then public observation should not interfere with it." Gideon pointed toward the north side of the house. "Water has already undermined the soil. The safest approach is to open the basement section and remove compromised material." Leona stepped into the doorway. "The floor above the well has not been shown to be structurally compromised." Gideon looked at her jacket, equipment, and credentials. "You are not the city engineer." "No, I am the environmental scientist who documented volatile compounds and layered sediment beneath that floor." The city officer shifted uneasily. Strake kept his attention on Harlan. "You are delaying necessary work while weather conditions worsen." "You brought the crew before the order took effect," Harlan said. "We brought equipment so it would be available." "And shut off requests for power. Standard procedure." Harlan looked at the excavator on the flatbed. "For a limited structural assessment?" Strake's thumb moved once across his titanium ring. "Northglass cannot allow one disputed access point to place workers, residents, and a major development at risk." "There are no residents left here except me." "That is precisely the point." Behind Harlan, Calder barked once. Not loud, not toward the people outside. The sound came from inside the house. Leona turned first. A second later, the water level alarm began sounding from the dining room. Dell ran toward the laptop. Harlan entered with Miriam close behind. Calder stood near the basement door, body rigid, ears angled toward a low vibration beneath the floor. The sound was faint but steady, water moving under pressure. Calder approached the north wall, then stopped before the metal-edged basement stairs. His left shoulder tightened. The old fear appeared in the lowered head and backward weight. He did not descend. He barked once more and looked at Harlan. Leona checked the sensor graph. "The level is rising." "How fast?" Miriam asked. "Too fast for meltwater." Nathaniel came to the screen. His face changed as he followed the line. "That is forced flow." "From where?" Harlan asked. Nathaniel opened the copied pressure diagram. "If 14B is open and the maintenance return is pressurized, it can push into the abandoned branch." Dell was already calling Walter Bryce, the retired control room operator. He answered after several rings, his voice rough with sleep. She put him on speaker. "The level at the operator house access is rising," she said. "Could 14B cause backflow?" "If the downstream isolation was never completed," Walter replied, "yes." "How do you stop it?" "Close 14B, then isolate the maintenance return at the north manifold. Do not close the downstream gate first, or you trap pressure in the old branch." Nathaniel pointed at the port beyond the window. "The north manifold is inside Meridian Crown's chemical yard." Miriam looked toward the public camera. "Can we establish that the valve was operated tonight?" "Only from the control logs," Nathaniel said, "if they still exist." Leona opened the basement camera feed. A dark line of water had appeared around the welded plate. The layers beneath the well were beginning to shift. "If they flood the access," she said, "the sediment structure may be disturbed." Harlan looked through the window at Gideon. The operations manager stood beside the Bayline truck with his radio near his mouth. Nathaniel saw it too. "He knew the old branch would respond," he said. "Can you prove he opened it?" Miriam asked. "No." "Then do not say it as fact." Nathaniel's eyes stayed on Gideon.
I can say he controls the system and knows the valve.
Audra Pell joined the encrypted video call from her vehicle. The image shook slightly as snow moved across the windshield behind her. She had a strong, rectangular face, close-cropped dark hair streaked with gray, and the steady expression of someone accustomed to receiving bad news without rewarding it with panic. "I am contacting the State Emergency Operations Center," she said. "Send me the sensor log, the live basement feed, and Nathaniel's signed statement." Miriam forwarded the files. Audra continued. "I can issue a formal preservation notice to Meridian Crown and request they retain all valve operation records. I cannot physically stop the work from this vehicle." "The court application is pending," Miriam said. "I will provide an emergency declaration that alteration of the well may destroy material relevant to a state investigation." Outside, Gideon approached the porch with the city officer.
The water movement confirms instability, he said. We need to open the floor now. Leona stepped forward. It confirms hydraulic activity in a line your company reported as isolated. Gideon's face reddened. You have no verified source. We have a rising level beneath a sealed well after your crew arrived. Correlation is not operation. The phrase sounded practiced. Strake joined them. Every minute we wait increases the structural risk. Miriam held up the emergency order. This permits removal of material demonstrated to be at immediate risk. It does not authorize excavation through an environmental sampling access under active review. Gideon pointed toward the basement window. You cannot stabilize what you refuse to expose. He turned to the bayline supervisor. Unload the machine. The flatbed ramps lowered. Metal struck metal. Inside the house, Calder flinched at the sound. His paws shifted backward, but he remained near the basement doorway. Harlan watched him. The dog's body wanted distance. His eyes remained on the place that frightened him. Harlan understood the effort in that posture better than any display of aggression. Outside, the excavator rolled down the ramps. The operator was a middle-aged man in a dark work coat. He drove slowly toward the north yard, then stopped before crossing the property line. The city officer signaled him forward. Miriam's phone remained silent. No ruling. Gideon motioned again. Bring it to the wall. The operator looked from the house to the order in the officer's hand. That paper covers the whole structure? It covers the hazard zone, Gideon said. That was not my question. Strake stepped toward the machine. You are operating under city authorization. The man kept both hands on the controls but did not move. Through the public feed, hundreds of viewers could now see the excavator idling in the snow, the residents across the road, and the officials clustered near the porch. The story no longer depended on anyone's later description. Dell came outside with the phone still connected to Walter. He confirms the system can be isolated without touching this house. Gideon's radio sounded. A voice spoke too softly for Harlan to understand. Gideon turned away and answered. Nathaniel stepped onto the porch. Ask him for the 14B operation log. Gideon looked at him. For the first time, his confidence visibly broke. Only for a moment. You are violating company confidentiality, he said. Nathaniel stood with no coat, snow collecting in his gray hair. The timestamp, he replied. Show them the timestamp. Strake moved between them. This is not the venue. It became the venue when the water started rising. Miriam's phone chimed. She looked down. No one spoke while she opened the message. Her eyes moved once across the screen. Then she stepped into the yard. A circuit judge has issued a temporary preservation order, she announced. For 48 hours, no party may disturb, remove, penetrate, or alter the basement floor, the inspection well, or connected piping. The order is effective immediately. Gideon shook his head. On what basis? Miriam raised the phone. State Environmental Declaration, documented rising water, independent structural opinion, sworn witness statement, and risk of irreparable destruction of evidence. Strake looked toward the city officer. Verify it. The officer called his department. The excavator continued idling.
Snow accumulated on its raised arm. After less than a minute, the city officer lowered his phone. "It is valid." The operator turned off the engine. The sudden quiet seemed larger than the machinery had been. No one cheered. Maeve lowered her camera across the road. Jonas kept filming. Dell closed her eyes for one breath. Nathaniel stood in the snow as though he had reached the end of a bridge and only then realized how far down the water was.
Audra's voice came through Miriam's phone. Meridian Crown is formally instructed to preserve all control room data, valve logs, security records, and maintenance communications related to 14B. Any deletion or alteration from this point forward will be documented as non-compliance. Gideon's hand tightened around the yellow radio. The city officer told him to step away from the North Foundation until state personnel arrived. Gideon did not argue further. He walked back toward the Bayline truck, his boots cutting deep marks into the snow. Strake remained. He looked at Harlan across the yard. "This changes 48 hours. "It preserves 48 hours, Harlan replied. "There is a difference." "Yes." For once, neither man pretended otherwise. The convoy did not leave immediately. Equipment had to be secured. Officials photographed the property. The utility company suspended the power shutoff request. Inside, Leona monitored the water level.
After the state contacted the Port Control Center, the rise slowed, then stopped. The level did not return to normal, but the sediment remained in place. Calder still stood near the basement door. The metallic vibration had faded. Harlan went to him and crouched. The dog's shoulder remained stiff. His breathing was controlled now, but not easy. Harlan placed a hand along the side of Calder's neck. "You stayed." Calder leaned his weight lightly against him. For years, Harlan had thought courage belonged to forward motion, to entering, confronting, holding a line no matter the cost. Calder had not gone down the stairs. He had not needed to. He had recognized the danger, refused the unsafe ground, and remained close enough to warn everyone else. Outside, the snow continued falling over the silent excavator, the temporary fences, and the foundations of houses that no longer existed. The house had not been defended by force.
It had survived because enough people had preserved enough fragments of truth for the law to see what the machine was about to erase, and for the next 48 hours, that truth would remain beneath Harlan's floor, undisturbed. The first official sampling team entered Harlan's basement 41 hours after the temporary preservation order was issued. By then, the excavator had been removed from the yard, Meridian Crown's control logs had been placed under legal hold, and the rising water beneath the inspection plate had stabilized. The house still carried signs of the confrontation: tire impressions pressed into the snow, survey flags around the North Foundation, and camera cables running through the dining room like temporary veins. Audra Pell arrived before sunrise. She wore a gray-blue field coat, black cargo trousers, and waterproof boots marked with highway salt. Her close-cropped hair was damp from the snow, and a black clipboard with a red metal clasp remained under one arm as she moved through the house. She did not congratulate Harlan. She checked the seals. That told him more about her than gratitude would have. Leona walked Audra through the sample record, the sensor data, the ventilation procedure, and the changes in water level. Miriam provided the court order and Nathaniel's declaration. Dell laid the paper utility maps beside the city's digital version. No one document settled the matter. That became the pattern of the months that followed. The first core sample taken under state supervision showed layered contamination extending deeper than Leona's preliminary extraction had reached. Additional samples were collected from the old drainage branch, a public easement beyond Shoreline Ward, and monitoring points on both sides of Meridian Crown's solvent maintenance zone. The results did not arrive as one dramatic announcement. They arrived in tables. Concentration ranges, depth profiles, dates, chemical ratios. The upstream samples contained ordinary industrial traces expected near an active port. The downstream points carried a different signature: glycol compounds,
chlorinated solvent residues, and metal treatment chemicals appearing together in proportions that matched materials purchased for Meridian Crown's maintenance operations. The deeper sediment layers indicated more than one release. Some were recent. Others had been buried long enough to predate the current warehouse project. When Leona presented the first complete comparison at Harlan's dining table, she spoke with the same restraint she had shown from the beginning. "This supports repeated movement from the maintenance zone into the old branch," she said. Maeve leaned forward. "Supports? It is stronger than suspicion and weaker than a final legal finding." Maeve looked toward Miriam. "Does everyone in this work speak as if words charge by the ounce?" Miriam did not look up from the report. "Only the people trying to keep them from being taken apart later." Dell tapped the old map with her folding ruler. "What about the valve records?" That part took longer. Meridian Crown initially produced summary logs showing no abnormal operation of 14B during the 3-year period under review. Audra's team requested raw control room data, maintenance backups, access records, and archived work orders. Several time blocks were missing. Others contained values entered manually after the original timestamps. Nathaniel identified the formatting differences. Walter Bryce confirmed that the older control system automatically stored pressure changes in a sequence that could not have produced the neat summaries Meridian Crown submitted. Then Jonas published the first article in his investigative series. He did not begin with Harlan standing before the excavator. He began with Maeve's laundromat invoices. A failed valve, a water heater replaced too soon, a city letter promising continued monitoring. From there, the article moved outward through the neighborhood, showing how each complaint had been treated as a separate inconvenience rather than part of a shared system. Harlan appeared in the 4th section. Jonas described him not as the man who saved Shoreline Ward, but as the resident who had once declined to sign the neighborhood petition and later allowed the last independent sampling access to be preserved beneath his home. The distinction embarrassed Harlan. It was also accurate. The article brought state attention, but not immediate justice. Meridian Crown issued a statement affirming its commitment to environmental responsibility and disputing any claim that current port operations had endangered residential water. The company agreed to fund temporary water testing for former shoreline residents, while denying that the program constituted an admission of fault. The warehouse project nearest the old line was paused. Other sections of the port continued operating. Northglass did not stop needing jobs simply because the ground beneath one neighborhood had become evidence. At the first public hearing, Corbin Strake sat beneath fluorescent lights in a navy suit, his titanium ring turning slowly beneath the table. He spoke about freight capacity, tax revenue, regional competition, and the number of workers whose livelihoods depended on the port. He did not deny that older infrastructure records were incomplete. He argued that incomplete records were not proof of deliberate concealment. Miriam asked whether he had approved the emergency contractor mobilization after learning that the basement well was part of an environmental inquiry. Strake answered carefully. "I approved preparations for a documented structural hazard. Were you informed that disturbing the basement could destroy layered sediment?" "I was informed there were competing assessments." "Did you instruct the contractor to wait for state review?" "I instructed the team to comply with city authorization." The answers were polished enough to avoid confession and narrow enough to reveal the choice beneath them. Strake had not needed to order anyone to destroy evidence. He had only needed to refuse every opportunity to slow down. Gideon Mercer's position became harder to defend. Control room access records placed his credentials on the system less than an hour before water began rising beneath Harlan's house. A manual override had been entered for 14B, followed by an attempt to replace the raw event with a maintenance summary. Gideon claimed the valve had been opened to reduce pressure in response to freezing conditions. Audra's investigators found no corresponding emergency work order. Bayline's crew supervisor produced messages instructing the company to be ready to remove all unstable material above the obsolete access before state personnel arrived. No message explicitly ordered the destruction of evidence. Together they formed a direction difficult to misunderstand. Gideon was suspended, then charged with falsifying operational records and interfering with material under investigation. The original decision during the storm 3 years earlier remains subject to technical review. His later actions were less ambiguous. He continued to insist that every choice began with protecting the port. Perhaps that was true. The problem was what he had decided could be sacrificed to protect it. Nathaniel lost his job before spring. The termination letter cited unauthorized disclosure of company information and breakdown of trust. Miriam challenged parts of it, but Nathaniel did not expect reinstatement. He became a cooperating witness. Some former residents thanked him for finally speaking. Maeve did not. At one meeting, Nathaniel approached her beside Harlan's porch with his hands empty and his shoulders held in the same narrow posture he had carried into the boat shed. "I should have acted sooner," he said. Maeve studied him. "Yes. I am sorry. I believe you." Hope crossed his face too quickly. Maeve continued. "Believing you are sorry is not the same as deciding your delay cost nothing." Nathaniel lowered his eyes. "I understand." "No," she said, echoing Miriam without knowing it. "You are beginning to." She handed him a box of copied invoices to carry inside. It was not forgiveness. It was work. Harlan received no public punishment for his earlier silence, but that did not mean the past became comfortable. At meetings, residents sometimes described the nights when they had tried to gather support and found his porch dark. One man asked why Harlan's concern had arrived only when the company threatened his own foundation. Harlan did not answer with the investigation, the cameras, or the preserved well. He said, "Because I was wrong before." The admission never became easier. It became more useful. The independent monitoring group took shape by early spring. Maeve represented former residents. Dell handled infrastructure, history, and maintenance records. Leona oversaw sampling design. Miriam served as legal counsel. Audra attended as the state liaison without surrendering regulatory independence. Nathaniel participated as a technical witness, but held no decision-making role. Jonas attended only when meetings concerned public records. He refused a permanent seat, saying reporters became less useful when they started believing they belonged to the committee they covered. Harlan offered his dining room for the first several months. The arrangement was temporary and inconvenient. People moved his chairs. Maeve placed documents in piles he considered disorderly. Dell left tools near the kitchen doorway. Miriam used the wall beside the pantry for a timeline without asking whether Harlan wanted adhesive on the paint. At first, he corrected everything after they left. Then he stopped correcting some of it. Calder spent the meetings beneath the table. He moved among the people without choosing a permanent side. When Nathaniel's breathing shortened during discussions of the altered report, Calder sometimes settled near his chair. When Maeve became angry enough to stand, he watched without interfering. When Harlan withdrew into silence, Calder placed one paw against his boot. The dog did not reconcile them. He made it harder for them to pretend they were not sharing the same room. The state established restricted access to the basement well for the duration of the investigation. Only authorized specialists entered the sealed area. Harlan retained ownership of the house, but the evidence beneath it could not be altered without notice. Several months later, crews drilled a permanent monitoring well on public land beside the old Shoreline Road. The new structure was practical and unremarkable: a locked metal casing, a concrete collar, identification numbers, and a narrow protective barrier. It gave investigators access without depending indefinitely on Harlan's home. The basement well remained as a historical comparison point. That mattered to Harlan more than he expected. Not because he wanted the investigation tied forever to his property, because the truth no longer needed his house in order to survive. On the day the new monitoring well was completed, Dell found him standing beside it with Calder. "You look disappointed," she said. "I am not. You look like a man whose emergency has learned to continue without him." Harlan glanced at her. "That's supposed to comfort me?" "No, it is supposed to explain the expression." She handed him a set of updated utility drawings. For the first time, the old branch beneath Shoreline Ward appeared on the official map. Not as inactive, not as removed, as under investigation. Harlan traced the line with one finger. For years, the pipe had continued beneath streets and foundations, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. The map had not created the truth. It had finally stopped denying it. Late winter loosened slowly around Northglass. Snow receded from the road edges, exposing gravel, dead grass, and the orange survey stakes Meridian Crown had planted months earlier. Meltwater ran in narrow silver channels toward the lake. The port cranes continued working in the distance. The entire company had not collapsed. The town had not transformed into a place where industry and conscience suddenly agreed. The civil case remained open. Health studies had only begun. Compensation, if it came, would take years. One bright morning, Harlan walked Calder along the rear slope. The old utility cover had been cleaned and temporarily secured beneath a protective frame. Its rusted municipal symbol was visible now. Calder stopped several feet away. Harlan felt the lead become still in his hand. The dog's ears shifted. His weight moved backward from the hollow metal. The memory remained in his body even after the danger around it had changed. Harlan did not call him forward. He did not shorten the lead. They stood together while meltwater moved beneath the snow. Calder looked at the cover, then at the open path beyond it. After a while, he stepped closer. One paw touched the metal rim. The cover gave a faint, contained sound. Calder froze. Harlan stayed where he was. No encouragement, no command. The dog shifted his weight forward and placed the second paw down. Then he walked across. It was not a cure. On the other side, Calder turned and waited. Harlan followed him. From the slope, he could see the blue-gray house, the public monitoring well, the fenced investigation area, and the distant port. All of them belonged to the same landscape now. No clean line separated home from industry, private choice from public consequence, or one man's silence from a neighborhood's loss. When Harlan and Calder returned, Dell, Maeve, Leona, and Nathaniel were waiting on the porch for another monitoring meeting. Dell was searching her coat pockets. "I dropped a glove." Calder veered toward the snowbank, lowered his nose, and returned with a brown work glove held carefully between his teeth. Dell took it. "Still the most useful male on the property." Nathaniel almost smiled. Maeve did not, but her eyes softened. Harlan opened the front door. Months earlier, he would have entered first, checked the rooms, and decided where everyone should sit. This time, he stepped aside. Maeve crossed the threshold, followed by Leona, Nathaniel, and Dell. Calder moved among them, golden-black coat bright in the winter sun. Harlan entered last. The final house in Shoreline Ward still stood, not as proof that one man had defeated a company, not as a monument to a veteran, a dog, or a single night before dawn. It stood because it had protected the evidence long enough for the truth to leave the basement, enter the record, and belong to everyone who had once been told their experience was too small to matter. The pipes beneath the neighborhood had not vanished when they disappeared from the map. Neither had the people. Sometimes the right choice does not arrive with certainty, safety, or applause. It may simply ask us to stop looking away when another person's burden has not yet reached our own door. Harlan could not change the years he remained silent, but he could choose what kind of man he would be when the truth finally stood before him. And perhaps that is one of the quiet ways grace enters our lives. Not by erasing our failures, but by giving us another chance to act with courage. May we have the wisdom to notice what others are carrying, and the strength to stand for what is right before it becomes personal. Please share in the comments what stayed with you most from this story, and subscribe if you would like to hear more stories about loyalty, truth, and the choices that shape who we become.